The boardroom fell silent the moment Victoria Catherine Brennan stepped through the double doors. 12 men in navy suits turned as one, their expressions ranging from calculated sympathy to thinly veiled anticipation. 6 weeks had passed since her father's yacht exploded off the coast of Galveston. 6 weeks since Michael Brennan's body was pulled from waters that shouldn't have claimed a man who'd sailed those routes for 30 years. The funeral had been a spectacle of corporate grief, but this morning's gathering carried a different weight. This was about power, succession, and the empire her father had built from nothing. The attorney, a silver-haired man named Douglas Pemberton, adjusted his glasses and began reading from the leather-bound folder before him. Victoria stood at the head of the table, her navy pencil dress and crisp white blazer a calculated armor against the scrutiny. She'd learned early that in rooms filled with men twice her age, appearance mattered as much as competence. Her father had taught her that, along with everything else about running Titan defense systems. Douglas cleared his throat, his voice carrying the formal cadence of legal proceedings. The words blurred together at first. Standard provisions about company shares, trust allocations, board authority. Then came the clause that made the air itself seem to thicken. Victoria Catherine Brennan would assume the position of Chief Executive Officer and controlling interest in Titan Defense Systems, provided she entered into a legally recognized marriage within 30 days of Michael Brennan's death. Failure to meet this condition would result in the dissolution of her inheritance, with controlling shares distributed among the board of directors. The silence that followed felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Victoria's expression remained perfectly neutral, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Around the table, board members exchanged glances that ranged from shock to something darker. Nathaniel Blackwood, her father's oldest friend and current board chairman, leaned forward with a grandfatherly smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Your father always valued traditional family structures, Victoria. Quite unexpected, but will support you through this transition period, my dear." Victoria met his gaze with the ice-cold composure that had earned her the nickname around the office. "Gentlemen, my personal life will remain personal. Titan's operations will continue without disruption." A younger board member, Theodore Whitmore, shifted in his seat. 30 days isn't much time, Miss Brennan. Perhaps we should discuss contingency plans." "I won't need contingencies." The words came out sharper than intended, but Victoria held her ground. Her father had groomed her for this role since she was old enough to understand what Titan defense represented. He'd walked her through every department, explained every contract, taught her to read people as easily as balance sheets. The idea that he would saddle her with this archaic requirement made no sense. Unless he'd known something she didn't. Unless this was protection disguised as control. The meeting dissolved into procedural discussions about quarterly projections and pending military contracts. Victoria participated with mechanical precision, her mind already calculating options. Around her, the men who'd spent 30 years in her father's shadow now circled like sharks, sensing blood in the water. Nathaniel Blackwood watched her with particular intensity, his fingers steepled beneath his chin in a gesture she remembered from childhood dinners at their family estate. When the last board member filed out, Victoria remained at the windows overlooking downtown Austin. The city sprawled beneath her, glass towers reflecting the morning sun, traffic moving in ordered patterns far below. Her office occupied the entire 8th floor of the building her father had commissioned 15 years ago. Everything about the space spoke of controlled power. Floor-to-ceiling windows, minimal furniture in steel and leather, walls lined with framed patents for weapons systems that had changed modern warfare. Her assistant, Emily Wright, appeared in the doorway with a tablet and an expression of carefully managed concern. Emily had worked for Victoria's father before transitioning to support his daughter, and in 3 years had proven herself invaluable. 29 years old, sharp enough to anticipate needs before they were voiced, and discreet enough to handle sensitive matters without supervision. I've compiled a preliminary list of candidates. Victoria turned from the window. The word tasted wrong in her mouth, clinical and detached, as if she were hiring for a vacant position rather than seeking a husband. Emily's tablet displayed a series of professional headshots and abbreviated biographies. Victoria scanned them with growing distaste. James Morrison, Vice President of Marketing. Divorced, no children, already cleared for classified information. Ambitious, well-connected in defense circles. Too ambitious. He'd view marriage as a stepping stone to greater influence. David Wu, Chief Financial Officer. Widowed 3 years ago, respected by the board. He plays golf with Nathaniel Blackwood every Sunday. He'd report directly back to the board about everything I do. Emily swiped to the next candidate, a military officer with silver temples and a chest full of medals. Colonel Andrew Barrett, liaison to the Department of Defense. Impeccable service record, extensive security clearances. He wants access to our weapons contracts, not a wife. Next, the parade of unsuitable men continued. Each carried fatal flaws, too connected to her competitors, too integrated with the board's existing power structure, too obviously seeking something beyond the arrangement itself. Victoria felt the walls closing in with each profile. 30 days to find someone she could control. Someone with no stake in Titan's future. Someone who would accept a transactional relationship without complications. What about someone outside our usual circles? Emily's voice carried a note of hesitation. Someone who needs the financial security enough to agree to your terms, but has no connections to leverage? Victoria crossed her arms. You have someone in mind? The night security guard. Connor Reeves. He's been with us for 4 months, passed every background check, 0 flags in his record. Keeps to himself, works the overnight shift. I ran a preliminary check, divorced, single father, primary custody of an 8-year-old daughter, financial pressure but clean credit, no debts beyond standard living expenses. A janitor? The word came out before Victoria could stop it, laden with more disdain than she'd intended. Emily's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes that might have been disappointment. Victoria had built her career on merit, on proving that intelligence and dedication mattered more than gender or family connections. Yet here she stood, dismissing a man based purely on his job title. He works security and maintenance. Former military, honorable discharge 5 years ago. Records are somewhat vague, but nothing that raised concerns during hiring. Victoria turned back to the window, processing this new option. A security guard would have access to the building but no real power within the company. A single father would need money, especially one raising a child alone. The arrangement could be straightforward. Generous compensation, separate lives, absolute discretion, and no emotional entanglement to complicate matters when the year ended. Send me his file. Everything we have. Emily hesitated, her fingers hovering over the tablet. There's one more thing you should know. 3 men who've gotten close to you in the past 2 years. Your previous assistant, the consultant from Raytheon, that journalist from Defense Weekly. All of them died in accidents. Car crash, home invasion, sudden illness. It might be coincidence, but Victoria's blood chilled. Are you suggesting someone is targeting people around me? I'm suggesting you should be careful. Whoever you choose, there might be risks beyond the obvious. After Emily left, Victoria pulled up Connor Reeves's personnel file on her private server. The photograph showed a man in his early 40s with dark hair, strong features, and eyes that seemed to track movement even through a static image. The kind of awareness that couldn't be taught, only earned through years of watching for threats. The background check revealed surprisingly little. Service record with redacted sections, honorable discharge, current address in a modest apartment complex on Austin's east side. References checked out, employment history clean if sparse. What the file didn't explain was why a man with apparent military training had chosen janitorial work at a defense contractor. Why someone capable enough to pass Titan's rigorous security screening would accept minimum wage to mop floors and empty trash bins. Victoria had learned long ago that gaps in information often revealed more than the data itself. The rest of her day dissolved into meetings, conference calls with Pentagon officials, reviews of prototype testing schedules. Victoria moved through it all with mechanical efficiency, her mind only half engaged with missile guidance systems and congressional appropriations. By 9 that evening, when most of the building had emptied for the night, she found herself riding the elevator down from the executive floor with a destination she hadn't consciously chosen. The 8th floor corridor stretched empty in both directions, overhead lights dimmed to half power for the evening. Victoria's heels clicked against polished marble as she walked toward the southern wing, where the executive offices gave way to conference rooms and research labs. She'd passed Connor Reeves in these halls before, though she couldn't remember paying him particular attention. Security and maintenance staff were meant to be invisible, their work completed in the margins of corporate awareness. A buffer crashed softly against tile somewhere ahead. Victoria rounded the corner to find a tall figure working methodically across the floor, his movements precise and unhurried. Connor Reeves wore the standard Titan maintenance uniform, gray shirt, darker gray pants, work boots designed for long hours on concrete. But something about his posture struck her as wrong for the role. Too straight, too aware. The kind of bearing that came from years of military discipline rather than janitorial routine. He noticed her approach without looking up, his hands never pausing in their work. Miss Brennan. Working late tonight. The voice carried a quiet authority that didn't match his station. Victoria found herself studying him with new attention. The way he'd positioned himself to keep both exits in his peripheral vision, how his apparently casual stance actually allowed for quick movement in any direction. Small details that most people would never register, but Victoria had spent her life reading subtext. I could say the same about you, Mr. Reeves. He glanced up then, and for a moment their eyes met directly. Dark brown, assessing, with the kind of careful observation that felt like being seen through rather than looked at. Then he returned his attention to the floor, the buffer humming steadily as he worked, the building's quiet at night, easier to focus. Victoria moved closer, her calculated composure firmly in place. You have a daughter, I understand. The buffer stopped. Connor straightened slowly, something shifting in his expression from neutral professionalism to guarded wariness. Lily. She's 8. Must be difficult, managing childcare while working nights. We make it work. My neighbor watches her when I'm here, and I'm home before she leaves for school. The conversation felt like verbal chess, each exchange probing for weakness while revealing nothing important. Victoria recognized the pattern because she used it herself in negotiations with military contractors who came to meetings already knowing they'd won the bid. The question wasn't whether to proceed, but how to frame the victory. I have a proposition that might interest you, Mr. Reeves. Something that could provide substantial financial security for your daughter's future. Connor's expression remained carefully blank, but his knuckles whitened slightly around the buffer's handle. I'm not interested in anything that would compromise my position here. This would actually solidify your position and provide $250,000 for a year of your time. The number hung in the air between them. Victoria watched emotions flicker across Connor's face: surprise, suspicion, calculation. He set the buffer aside and crossed his arms, his posture defensive but his eyes sharp with sudden interest. What kind of proposition are we talking about? Victoria explained the situation with clinical precision: her father's will, the marriage clause, the need for someone with no stake in Titan's future who would accept a straightforward contract. 1 year, separate lives, generous compensation, and absolute discretion. She watched Connor process the information, noting how his gaze never wavered, how he didn't react with the greed or excitement she'd expected. Why me? Because you need money. Because you won't ask complicated questions. Because you're already cleared for work in this building and won't require extensive vetting. And because... She paused, choosing her next words carefully. Because you understand the value of keeping your head down and doing a job without drawing attention. Connor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You don't know anything about me. I know enough. Former military, honorable discharge. Single father with custody. You work nights to be home with your daughter during the day. You need stability and resources. I can provide both. A long silence stretched between them. Somewhere in the building's depths, a ventilation system hummed to life. Connor looked away, his gaze distant, and Victoria glimpsed something beneath his careful composure. Exhaustion, perhaps, or the weight of responsibilities that $250,000 could ease. When he spoke again, his voice carried a different quality, harder and more direct. I have conditions. Lily comes first, always. Whatever arrangement we make, it doesn't interfere with my daughter or her routine, and no background checks beyond what you've already done. Everyone has things they'd rather leave behind. Victoria extended her hand. We have an agreement, Mr. Reeves. His grip was firm and controlled when they shook, the handshake of someone accustomed to binding contracts without signatures. For a moment, Victoria felt the absolute wrongness of the situation, standing in a dimly lit corridor at 9:30 at night, negotiating a marriage contract with a man who cleaned her office floors. But desperation made pragmatists of everyone, and she had 23 days left to secure her inheritance. Connor released her hand and took a step back, his expression unreadable. When do we proceed? Monday. I'll have my attorney draw up the contract. We can marry at the courthouse by end of week. And your daughter? What does she know about any of this? Something flickered in Connor's expression, protective and fierce. She knows I'm considering a job opportunity that would require some changes to our living situation. She doesn't need to know more than that until I decide if this is happening. Fair enough. We should meet beforehand, though. Establish some basic parameters for how this will work. Connor nodded slowly. Saturday afternoon. I'll text you my address. Come by at 2 o'clock. You can meet Lily, see where we live. Make sure you're comfortable with the reality before you commit. Victoria left the building 20 minutes later, her mind churning through implications and complications she'd barely begun to consider. The parking garage stretched nearly empty, her BMW the only car in the executive section. She just proposed marriage to a janitor she'd spoken to for the first time tonight. A man she knew almost nothing about beyond what fit into a sparse personnel file and a 10-minute conversation. The sheer absurdity of it should have sent her back upstairs to reconsider, to find literally anyone else who might serve the same purpose. But something about Connor Reeves felt right in a way she couldn't articulate. The way he'd negotiated rather than immediately accepting, his insistence on protecting his daughter, the sense that he was playing a deeper game than his station suggested. Victoria had spent her career reading people, identifying assets and liabilities in potential partners and competitors. Connor registered as something more complex than a desperate single father taking easy money. The drive back to her penthouse took 15 minutes through downtown Austin's Friday night traffic. Victoria's apartment occupied the top floor of a converted warehouse building, all exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows with views across Lady Bird Lake. She'd bought it 3 years ago with her first significant bonus, decorating it with the same precision she applied to everything else. Clean lines, minimal furniture, no personal touches beyond a single photograph of her parents, taken before her mother's death when Victoria was 18. She poured 2 fingers of scotch and stood at the windows, watching the city lights reflect off dark water. Her phone buzzed with messages from Emily, follow-up notes from today's meetings, a reminder about Monday's presentation to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a brief query about whether Victoria had made any decisions regarding the situation. Victoria typed a quick response confirming Monday's meeting and ignored the implicit question. The scotch burned smoothly down her throat, and Victoria allowed herself a moment of raw honesty. She was 38 years old, sole heir to a defense empire worth billions, and completely alone. Her last relationship had ended 2 years ago when the man in question decided he'd rather date someone who came home before midnight and didn't spend weekends reviewing classified weapons specifications. Before that, there'd been a string of brief connections that dissolved under the weight of her ambition and inability to share meaningful parts of herself. Her father had been the same way, brilliant, driven, capable of extraordinary focus on his work while remaining emotionally distant from everyone around him. Victoria's mother had called it the Brennan curse, the inability to let anyone close enough to become truly vulnerable. Then her mother died in a car accident the summer Victoria turned 18, and whatever fragile emotional foundation the family maintained crumbled completely. Michael Brennan threw himself into Titan, expanding the company from a regional defense contractor to one of the Pentagon's primary weapons suppliers. Victoria followed his path, earning degrees in aerospace engineering and business, completing internships at Lockheed Martin and Raytheon before returning to Austin to join her father's company. They'd worked side by side for 15 years, and she could count on one hand the number of conversations they'd had about anything personal. Now he was gone, and his final act had been to force her into a marriage she didn't want with a timeline that made genuine connection impossible. Unless that had been the point. Unless her father had recognized something in Victoria that she couldn't see in herself. The absolute isolation. The fortress she'd built around anything resembling emotional vulnerability. Maybe the marriage clause wasn't about control or tradition. Maybe it was about forcing his daughter to let someone in, even artificially, even temporarily. Victoria finished the scotch and went to bed without bothering to eat. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams where she stood before the board of directors wearing a wedding dress made of corporate contracts, her father's voice reading endless clauses while Nathaniel Blackwood smiled and smiled. She woke at 5:30 Saturday morning to her alarm's harsh beeping, already calculating the day ahead. Morning workout in her building's gym, 90 minutes pushing her body to exhaustion because that was easier than sitting still with her thoughts. Shower, protein shake, emails on her laptop while CNN played silently in the background. By 9, she'd responded to 16 messages and drafted a preliminary response to a Pentagon inquiry about drone targeting systems. Connor's text arrived at 11, 847 Riverside Drive, apartment 3B. Come up when you get here. No need to knock. Door will be open. The address was east of downtown, in one of Austin's older neighborhoods where modest apartment complexes clustered near chain restaurants and discount grocery stores. Victoria had never been to this part of the city. Her life contained within the triangle of office, penthouse, and occasionally the upscale restaurants where she entertained military contractors. Driving her BMW through streets lined with aging sedans and pickup trucks felt like crossing into foreign territory. She parked in front of a 3-story building whose brown paint had faded to something closer to rust. The complex wrapped around a central courtyard where a few children played on cracked pavement, their laughter echoing off concrete. Victoria felt profoundly out of place in her designer jeans and silk blouse, but she climbed the external stairs to the 3rd floor and found apartment 3B without difficulty. The door stood slightly ajar, as promised. Victoria knocked anyway, announcing herself before stepping inside. The apartment opened into a combined living room and kitchen, small but meticulously clean. Furniture that had seen better days but was obviously cared for. A worn couch covered with a faded quilt, a coffee table stacked with books and what appeared to be homework assignments, walls decorated with a child's crayon drawings in careful frames. Connor emerged from the kitchen wearing jeans and a gray t-shirt, his hair still damp from a recent shower. He looked different outside his maintenance uniform, younger, more relaxed, though his eyes still carried that quality of constant awareness. You found it okay. Coffee, please. He poured from a pot that smelled far better than anything Victoria made in her expensive espresso machine. She accepted the mug and found herself studying the apartment more carefully. Everything spoke of a man trying hard to create stability for his child. Fresh fruit in a bowl on the counter, school permission slips pinned to a bulletin board, a backpack hanging by the door with a stuffed unicorn keychain attached. Lily's at soccer practice until 3, so we have time to talk through details. But I should warn you, she's going to ask a lot of questions when I tell her about this arrangement. What will you tell her? Connor leaned against the counter, his expression thoughtful. That I've been offered a job opportunity that comes with better pay and some changes to our living situation. That will be staying with you for a while. Kids are adaptable if you're honest with them in ways they can understand. And when the year ends, we figure that out when we get there. Lily's already learned that sometimes adults make decisions that seem strange but are meant to help the family. Her mother walking out taught her that lesson early. The bitterness in his voice was barely perceptible, but Victoria caught it. She wanted to ask more about the divorce, about the ex-wife who'd left him with full custody, but that felt like crossing boundaries they hadn't established. Instead, she sipped her coffee and found it perfect. Strong, hot, slightly bitter. What about living arrangements? Your place or mine? Yours has more space, I'd imagine. And it makes sense for appearances that I move into my wife's home rather than the other way around. But Lily needs her own room and some of her things from here. That can be arranged. I have 3 bedrooms. Connor nodded, then moved to the window overlooking the courtyard. When he spoke again, his voice carried a different weight, more serious. I need to be clear about something, Miss Brennan. This arrangement is purely financial for me. I'm not looking for companionship or emotional connection. I'm a single father trying to provide for my daughter. That's my only priority. Victoria felt a flash of something that might have been relief or disappointment, though she couldn't identify which. That's exactly what I want. Professional distance, clear boundaries. We both get what we need without complications. Good. Then, we understand each other. They spent the next hour discussing logistics with the precision of negotiating a defense contract, bank accounts, living arrangements, public appearances, what to tell Emily and Titan's board. Connor proved surprisingly detail-oriented, asking questions about tax implications and health insurance that Victoria hadn't even considered. He insisted on separate bedrooms, minimal shared space in her apartment, and that his relationship with Lily remain his primary focus. At 2:30, they heard footsteps pounding up the exterior stairs. A child's voice called out something about a goal she'd scored, and then an 8-year-old girl burst through the still open door. She had Connor's dark hair pulled into a ponytail, grass stains on her knees, and the kind of energy that came from running around a soccer field for 2 hours. Lily froze when she saw Victoria, her eyes going wide. "Dad, you have a visitor." Connor moved to his daughter's side, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "Lily, this is Victoria Brennan. She's someone I work with. Victoria, this is my daughter Lily." The girl studied Victoria with a directness that would have been uncomfortable if it wasn't so clearly born of curiosity rather than judgment. She stepped forward and extended a small hand, her grip firm when they shook. "Nice to meet you, Miss Brennan. Are you Dad's boss?" "Something like that, sweetheart. And you can call me Victoria." Lily glanced between them, her expression shifting to something more calculating. Dad doesn't usually have visitors, especially not ones dressed like they're going somewhere fancy. Connor's mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. Lily has excellent observation skills. Also no filter whatsoever. I think that's a valuable trait. Victoria surprised herself by meaning it. The girl's directness felt refreshing after a week of navigating boardroom politics and veiled implications. They ordered pizza for dinner, and Victoria found herself staying longer than planned. Lily dominated the conversation with stories about school, her soccer team, a book series she was reading about dragons and wizards. Connor listened with patient attention, occasionally asking questions that showed he knew every detail of his daughter's life. The dynamic between them was easy, affectionate, built on a foundation of trust that Victoria recognized as rare and precious. When Lily excused herself to work on homework, Connor walked Victoria to the door. His expression had shifted to something more guarded, protective. "She's everything to me. This arrangement, whatever it becomes, it can't hurt her. That's non-negotiable. I understand. And I promise you, I'll do everything possible to make this work without disrupting her life." Connor held her gaze for a long moment, as if searching for deception or hidden agenda. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him because he nodded slowly. "Okay then, let's do this." Victoria drove back to her penthouse with the taste of cheap pizza and the echo of a child's laughter still fresh in her mind. She felt unmoored, as if the ground beneath her carefully constructed life had shifted in ways she couldn't quite identify. Connor Reeves and his daughter represented something foreign to her experience. Genuine warmth, unguarded affection, a home built on love rather than ambition. The contract arrived in her email Sunday morning, dense legalese that reduced their arrangement to clauses and contingencies. Victoria signed it electronically after reviewing every paragraph twice. Connor's signature appeared within an hour, and just like that, She'd agreed to marry a man she barely knew for reasons that felt both completely practical and utterly insane. Monday morning brought her back to Titan's offices, where Emily had scheduled back-to-back meetings that consumed her attention until well past lunch. Victoria moved through presentations and conference calls with mechanical efficiency, her mind only half engaged. She found herself watching the clock, aware that Connor would arrive for his shift at 10 that evening, wondering if their dynamic had changed now that contracts were signed. At 9:30, she left her office and walked the corridors of the 8th floor. The cleaning staff worked in pairs usually, their carts loaded with supplies as they moved through conference rooms and executive offices. But tonight, Connor worked alone in the southern wing, running a vacuum across carpet that looked perfectly clean already. He noticed her approach and turned off the machine. The resulting silence felt heavy with unspoken implications. Victoria crossed her arms, maintaining professional distance even as something in her wanted to close the gap between them. "The attorney says we can get a courthouse appointment for Thursday morning, 9 o'clock, if that works for you." Connor nodded slowly. "I'll need to arrange childcare for Lily. Mrs. O'Brien can watch her for a few hours." "Mrs. O'Brien?" "My neighbor. She's retired, loves kids, charges almost nothing to babysit. Lily adores her." Victoria filed away this detail along with everything else she'd learned about Connor's life. The man was clearly resourceful, building a support network on what must be a devastatingly tight budget. The $250,000 she was paying would change everything for him and Lily. College fund, better apartment, financial breathing room. Yet he'd negotiated with her as an equal, insisting on conditions and boundaries that protected his dignity. "I should go." Victoria surprised herself with the words, "Long day tomorrow, and I need to prepare for the Joint Chiefs presentation." Connor's expression remained neutral, professional. "Of course. See you Thursday then." She turned to leave, then paused and looked back. Connor stood in the empty corridor with his vacuum and cleaning supplies, looking nothing like the military operative his redacted service record hinted at. But Victoria had learned to read subtext, to see what people tried to hide beneath acceptable facades. Connor Reeves was playing a role, just as she was. The question she couldn't answer was why a man with obvious capabilities had chosen invisibility. Thursday morning arrived with cloudless skies and unseasonable warmth for October. Victoria dressed with calculated simplicity, white sheath dress, minimal jewelry, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. Not a wedding dress, but something that acknowledged the occasion without embracing it. She met Connor outside the Travis County Courthouse at 8:45, finding him in a borrowed suit that fit reasonably well despite clearly coming from someone else's closet. They signed papers in a small room with fluorescent lighting and worn linoleum floors. A justice of the peace named Margaret Williams performed the ceremony with efficient boredom, having clearly married hundreds of couples in this same airless space. Connor's hand was steady when he slipped the simple silver band onto Victoria's finger. Her hands trembled slightly when she reciprocated, though whether from nervousness or the sheer unreality of the moment, she couldn't determine. "By the power vested in me by the state of Texas, I now pronounce you husband and wife." They didn't kiss. Victoria had specified no physical affection beyond what was legally required, and Connor had agreed without argument. They signed the marriage certificate, accepted congratulations from the justice of the peace, and walked back into warm sunlight as husband and wife. A man stood across the street, partially obscured by a food truck but clearly watching them. He held a phone at an angle that suggested photography rather than casual use. When Connor turned to look directly at him, The man lowered the phone and walked quickly away. Victoria felt cold despite the sunshine. "Did you see that?" Someone was taking pictures. Connor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Probably just curious. Courthouse weddings aren't exactly private affairs. But Victoria knew he was lying. She'd seen the calculation in his eyes, the way he'd automatically assessed threat level and potential danger. Whatever Connor Reeves had been before becoming a janitor at Titan Defense, it hadn't prepared him to dismiss surveillance as coincidence. They parted ways in the parking lot with vague plans to discuss moving arrangements over the weekend. Victoria drove back to her office, her left hand resting on the steering wheel where afternoon light caught the silver ring and transformed it into something that felt both foreign and permanent. She'd just married a stranger, given him legal claim to her life, her assets, her future. The enormity of what she'd done settled over her like a weight she couldn't quite process. That evening, alone in her penthouse with CNN playing softly in the background, Victoria received an encrypted email to her personal account. The sender was listed only as a string of numbers, but the message itself made her blood run cold. "Congratulations on your marriage. But Connor Reeves isn't who you think he is. Check the classified files on Operation Phantom Retrieval, Yemen, 2019. Your new husband commanded a unit that doesn't officially exist. And the people who killed your father know exactly who he is." Victoria stared at the encrypted message until her vision blurred, then read it 3 more times, trying to find alternate interpretations that didn't exist. Operation Phantom Retrieval, Yemen, 2019. A unit that doesn't officially exist. The words arranged themselves into patterns that made terrible sense. Connor's redacted service records, his careful maintenance of invisibility, the way he moved through space like someone trained to assess and neutralize threats. She pulled up Titan's classified database, the one requiring 3 levels of security clearance that only she and 2 other executives could access. Her fingers trembled slightly as she typed search parameters, narrowing results to military operations in Yemen during 2019. Nothing appeared under official channels. She tried broader searches, filtering through Pentagon reports and intelligence summaries her father had archived during his tenure. Finally, buried in a folder marked Unconfirmed Asset Deployments, she found a heavily redacted document referencing Phantom Unit. Most details were blacked out, but fragments remained visible. High-value target elimination, covert insertion, asset compromise, unit presumed eliminated. The date matched, November 2019, approximately 5 years ago, right around when Connor would have received his honorable discharge and returned stateside. Victoria's phone buzzed. Emily's name appeared on the screen, but Victoria let it go to voicemail. She needed time to process what she discovered, to decide whether confronting Connor immediately or gathering more information made better tactical sense. Her instincts said, wait, observe, learn what he was really doing at Titan before revealing that she knew his secret. But the message's final line haunted her. And the people who killed your father know exactly who he is. If that was true, if Connor's presence at Titan was somehow connected to Michael Brennan's death, then this wasn't a simple contract marriage anymore. This was something far more dangerous, and she just legally bound herself to a man who might be either her protection or her destruction. The weekend passed in a blur of moving logistics. Connor arrived Saturday morning with Lily and 2 duffel bags that apparently contained everything they owned worth keeping. The 8-year-old's eyes went wide, taking in Victoria's penthouse, the exposed brick, the lake views, the open floor plan that made their former apartment look like a closet by comparison. "This is where we're going to live?" Lily's voice carried awe and uncertainty in equal measure. Victoria found herself kneeling to the girl's level, something she'd never done with any child before. For a while, yes. You'll have your own room, and we'll make sure you have space for all your things. Can I put up my drawings? Of course, it's your room. You can decorate however you want. Lily threw her arms around Victoria's neck in an impulsive hug that lasted exactly 3 seconds before she pulled away, embarrassed. Connor watched this exchange with an expression Victoria couldn't quite read. Surprise, perhaps, or something more complicated that involved reassessing the woman he'd married. They spent the afternoon arranging furniture and unpacking Lily's belongings. Victoria discovered she owned almost nothing suitable for an 8-year-old. No games, no books appropriate for children, nothing in her kitchen that wasn't gourmet ingredients or expensive wine. Connor made a list on his phone of items they'd need to purchase, his tone businesslike as he cataloged deficiencies in Victoria's child-free lifestyle. But when Lily asked if she could help make dinner, something shifted. Victoria found herself in the kitchen with the girl, following Connor's patient instructions about how to properly dice vegetables for pasta sauce. Lily chattered about her soccer team, about a science project due next week involving the solar system, about whether Victoria thought unicorns might actually exist somewhere in the world. Definitely unicorns exist. They're just very good at hiding. Lily giggled, a sound that made Victoria's chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't quite name. She'd spent her entire adult life avoiding precisely this scenario: domestic partnership, parental responsibility, the vulnerability of caring about people beyond professional capacity. Yet here she stood in her own kitchen, teaching an 8-year-old how to measure oregano while her contract husband grilled chicken and hummed something under his breath. After dinner, Connor put Lily to bed in her new room. Victoria listened to their voices through the wall, his low and steady, hers excited and gradually slowing as sleep approached. The apartment felt different with them in it, warmer somehow, as if their presence had introduced elements her carefully curated space had always lacked. Connor emerged 20 minutes later, closing Lily's door quietly behind him. He changed into sweatpants and a worn t-shirt, his military bearings slightly relaxed in the privacy of what was now technically his home. He found Victoria on the couch with her laptop, reviewing quarterly projections that required her attention regardless of the chaos in her personal life. She's asleep. Went down easy. New places usually excite her enough that exhaustion wins. Victoria closed her laptop. We should talk about boundaries, how this arrangement works day to day. Connor settled into the chair opposite her, maintaining physical distance even as their living situation collapsed any pretense of separation. His expression remained neutral, but Victoria had learned to read the small tells, the way his jaw tightened slightly, how his fingers drummed once against his thigh before he stilled them. I work nights, so I'll be gone from 10 until 6 most mornings. Mrs. O'Brien agreed to check on Lily around midnight, make sure she's okay. I'll be home before she wakes up for school. What about your investigation? The words left Victoria's mouth before she could reconsider. Connor went absolutely still, his entire body radiating sudden tension. For 3 seconds, he didn't breathe. Didn't move, assessing threat levels and calculating responses. Then his expression smoothed into careful neutrality that confirmed everything. I don't know what you mean. Victoria leaned forward, her voice low despite Lily sleeping 2 rooms away. Phantom Unit, Operation Phantom Retrieval, Yemen, 2019. You commanded a classified team that officially doesn't exist, and you're at Titan investigating something connected to my father's death. Connor's eyes went flat and dangerous. the careful janitor persona dissolving to reveal something far more lethal underneath. When he spoke, his voice carried quiet authority that made clear he'd commanded men in life or death situations. "Who told you?" I received an anonymous message. "After our wedding, someone knows who you are, Connor, and they wanted me to know too." He stood abruptly, pacing to the windows that overlooked the lake. His hands flexed once, twice, as if working through scenarios Victoria couldn't imagine. When he turned back, his expression had shifted to something resembling resignation mixed with calculation. "Your father contacted my former commanding officer 6 weeks before he died. Said he'd discovered something at Titan, something big enough that he couldn't trust normal channels. He specifically requested me by name." Victoria's world tilted slightly. Her father had known Connor, had reached out to him deliberately. That changed everything about their supposedly random contract marriage. "Why you specifically?" Connor's jaw worked as if chewing words he didn't want to release. "Because 15 years ago, when I was young and broken and sleeping in alleys after my first deployment, a teenage girl gave me half her sandwich and told me everyone deserved to eat. I never forgot her face. And when Michael Brennan showed me her picture and asked for help protecting his daughter, I couldn't refuse." The memory surfaced slowly. Victoria at 16, leaving Titan's building after spending Saturday with her father, seeing a homeless veteran outside and impulsively sharing her lunch. She'd thought nothing of it, a small kindness that took 30 seconds and required no follow-up. But Connor had remembered, had carried that moment for 15 years until it became the foundation of why he'd accepted an undercover assignment protecting a woman he'd met once for less than a minute. So the marriage was never just about your inheritance. Your father was murdered, Victoria. Someone at Titan discovered he was investigating weapons diversions and decided elimination was simpler than explanation. He knew you'd be next in line, so he added that marriage clause to force you to have protection close, someone you'd have to trust legally, if not emotionally. Victoria processed this information with the same analytical precision she applied to weapons specifications. Her father hadn't been controlling her future. He'd been securing it. The marriage clause was his final act of love, delivered through the only language he knew how to speak. Protection disguised as corporate procedure. "What have you found?" Connor returned to his chair, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Titan's prototype weapons systems are being deliberately failed after delivery to U.S. forces. But identical technology appears in foreign arsenals within weeks. Syria, North Korea, groups we're actively fighting. Someone's sabotaging our own military while selling working versions to the highest bidder. That's treason. That's Phoenix Protocol. An international arms network that's been operating for at least a decade. They specialize in recruiting insiders at defense contractors, using them to steal and sell classified technology. My team stumbled onto one of their operations in Yemen. We were sent to eliminate a terrorist cell that turned out to be much bigger. An entire supply chain for stolen American weapons. And your team? Connor's expression went carefully blank, but Victoria saw the grief beneath. We were betrayed. Someone in our chain of command sold us out, gave our position to the enemy. Ambush killed most of my unit. I survived along with 3 others, but officially we're all dead. Easier to erase the mission than explain why American Special Forces got massacred protecting an operation that never officially existed. Victoria stood and poured herself scotch with hands that shook slightly. She offered the bottle to Connor, who shook his head. Alcohol and revelations didn't mix well with maintaining operational security, So you're here investigating Phoenix Protocol's connection to Titan, and you think Nathaniel Blackwood is involved? I think your father thought Blackwood was involved. His private notes mention suspicions about board members, unusual financial transfers, testing failures that benefited competitors, but he couldn't prove it before they killed him. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of conspiracy and murder pressing down on Victoria's carefully ordered life. Everything she'd built at Titan, every contract she'd negotiated, every weapon system she'd helped develop, all of it potentially compromised by traitors operating from within her own company. What do we do? Connor met her gaze directly. We investigate carefully. We trust no one at Titan except each other. We gather evidence until we have enough to expose the entire network, and we protect Lily, because if Phoenix Protocol realizes I'm alive and investigating them, they'll use her as leverage. The word landed like a physical blow. Victoria had agreed to this arrangement thinking it was a business transaction, complications contained to 1 year and then cleanly dissolved. But Connor's daughter sleeping peacefully in the next room had just become a target in a war Victoria hadn't known she was fighting. I'll do whatever necessary to keep her safe. Connor's expression softened slightly, gratitude mixed with assessment. I believe you, which is why I'm trusting you with information that could get us both killed. They talked until nearly 2 a.m, Victoria absorbing details about Phoenix Protocol, Phantom Unit's betrayal, the patterns Connor had identified in Titan's classified shipments. He showed her encrypted files on his personal laptop, evidence he'd been gathering during 4 months of working night shifts with access to areas most employees never saw. When exhaustion finally forced them to separate, Victoria lay in her bed staring at the ceiling and processing everything she'd learned. Her father hadn't been distant, he'd been protective. Her marriage wasn't arbitrary, it was strategic. And the man sleeping in her guest room wasn't a janitor. He was a weapon pointed at the people who'd murdered Michael Brennan. Monday morning brought new complications. Victoria arrived at Titan's headquarters to find Nathaniel Blackwood waiting outside her office, his expression carrying grandfatherly concern that felt suddenly predatory. Victoria, my dear, I heard about your wedding. Quite sudden, wasn't it? She maintained perfect composure, allowing nothing to show on her face. When you know, you know. And your new husband, Connor, is it? I'd like to meet him properly. Perhaps dinner this week at the club? The invitation carried weight beyond social nicety. Blackwood was probing, testing whether Victoria's marriage was legitimate or simply compliance with her father's bizarre requirement. Having Connor meet the board chairman would either solidify their cover or expose weaknesses Blackwood could exploit. I'll check our schedules. Connor works nights, so arrangements can be complicated. Blackwood's eyes sharpened with interest Victoria wished she could retract. Night work? What does he do? Security and facility maintenance here at Titan, actually. That's how we met. The older man's expression flickered with something that might have been surprise or suspicion before smoothing back to pleasant neutrality. How convenient. I'm sure he's very dedicated to his work. After Blackwood left, Victoria called Connor from her office phone. He answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the groggy quality of someone woken from necessary sleep. Blackwood wants to meet you. Dinner at his country club. Connor was silent for several seconds, processing implications. When? This week, preferably. I couldn't refuse without raising suspicions. Fine. Thursday night. That gives me 3 days to prepare. Prepare for what? To be the kind of man a woman like you would marry. To convince Nathaniel Blackwood I'm exactly what I appear to be. A single father who got lucky with a contract marriage. Nothing more threatening than that. Victoria heard Lily's voice in the background asking about breakfast. Connor covered the phone to respond, his tone patient and warm, then returned to their conversation. I need to go. Lily has soccer practice, and I promised we'd work on her science project this afternoon. Connor, yeah? Be careful. If Blackwood suspects anything, he won't hesitate to eliminate the threat. Neither will I. The line went dead. Victoria sat alone in her office, contemplating how thoroughly her life had transformed in 1 week. She'd gained a husband, a stepdaughter, and enemies who'd murdered her father without hesitation. The walls she'd built around herself, the isolation, the emotional distance, had been breached by an 8-year-old girl asking if unicorns existed, and a warrior pretending to be a janitor while hunting the people who'd betrayed him. Wednesday evening, Victoria came home from work to find Connor teaching Lily self-defense in the living room. He'd moved furniture to create space, and the girl was learning basic escape techniques with surprising intensity. If someone grabs your wrist, what do? Twist toward their thumb. It's the weakest point. Good. Show me. Lily demonstrated the technique with exaggerated movements, breaking Connor's deliberately loose grip. He praised her effort, made corrections to her form, then had her practice again. Victoria watched from the doorway, recognizing this for what it was. A father preparing his daughter for danger he hoped would never come. After Lily went to bed, Connor found Victoria on the balcony overlooking the lake. The Austin skyline glittered in the distance, city lights reflecting off dark water. He leaned against the railing beside her, maintaining careful distance. Teaching her self-defense seems extreme. Connor's jaw tightened. Phoenix Protocol burned my team alive in Yemen. If they discover I'm still breathing and investigating them, extreme is the minimum preparation required. She's 8 years old, which is exactly why she needs to know how to break a wrist hold and run. Because 8-year-olds make perfect hostages when you want leverage over someone like me. Victoria turned to face him fully, seeing the weight he carried, responsibility for his daughter, guilt over his fallen team, determination to finish what Michael Brennan had started. She recognized it because she carried similar burdens, different specifics, but identical pressure. We're going to survive this, all three of us. Connor met her gaze, and for the first time, Victoria saw something beyond careful calculation. Hope, perhaps, or the beginning of trust that went deeper than contractual obligation. He reached out slowly, giving her time to step back, and took her hand. His grip was warm and solid, an anchor in waters that had become dangerously turbulent. Yeah, we are. Thursday night arrived with unseasonable cold and threatening rain. Victoria dressed carefully for dinner at Blackwood's Country Club, elegant but not excessive, the kind of outfit that suggested old money and conservative values. Connor emerged from his room wearing the same borrowed suit from their courthouse wedding, but he'd somehow transformed himself into someone who belonged in expensive restaurants. Posture adjusted, expression smoothed, every movement calibrated to project non-threatening competence. In the car, he briefed her on his cover story with military precision. They'd met when Victoria worked late and he was cleaning her office. Conversation led to coffee, which led to dinner, which led to marriage when they discovered mutual attraction and Victoria's deadline. Simple, believable, boring enough that no one would question it too deeply. The country club occupied sprawling grounds west of Austin, all manicured lawns and old money architecture. Nathaniel Blackwood met them in the lobby with handshakes and assessments disguised as warmth. He guided them to a private dining room where board member Theodore Whitmore and his wife already waited. Dinner conversation flowed through safe topics: the weather, local politics, mutual acquaintances in Austin's business community. Victoria participated with practiced ease, years of corporate entertaining having prepared her for exactly this performance. But she watched Connor carefully, noting how he deflected personal questions with charming vagueness, how he made himself forgettable while remaining polite. Then Blackwood shifted tactics. "Connor, Victoria mentioned you were former military. What branch?" "Army. Served 8 years before medical discharge. Nothing serious, I hope?" Connor's expression remained pleasant, unreadable. "PTSD. Occupational hazard in combat zones. Spent time getting treatment. Decided military life wasn't compatible with being the father Lily needed. Understandable. And now you work at Titan doing facility maintenance, security patrols. Keeps me busy, pays the bills, lets me be home for my daughter during the day. Quite a shift from military service." Connor met Blackwood's gaze directly. "Sometimes the biggest battles are making sure your kid has clean clothes and help with homework. Different kind of service, but just as important." The answer was perfect. Humble, focused on parenting, suggesting a man who'd traded ambition for stability. Blackwood nodded slowly, seeming to accept this narrative. But Victoria caught the calculation in his eyes, the way he studied Connor for inconsistencies. They left the club 2 hours later with polite farewells and promises to arrange future gatherings. Victoria waited until they were in her car and 3 blocks away before speaking. "He didn't believe you." Connor stared out the window at passing streetlights. "Number." "He's suspicious." "But suspicion isn't proof. And we didn't give him anything concrete to work with. What happens now?" "Now we accelerate the investigation. Because Blackwood will be digging into my background, and eventually he'll discover things that don't match the cover story. We need evidence against him before he realizes I'm Phantom Unit's ghost." They drove in silence back to the penthouse. Lily was asleep when they arrived, Mrs. O'Brien having stayed until their return. The older woman left with cheerful goodbyes, oblivious to the dangerous currents swirling around the family she'd helped care for. Victoria poured scotch for both of them this time, and Connor accepted without argument. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, exhaustion and tension finally catching up after hours of careful performance. "Thank you. For tonight. For playing your part perfectly." Connor swirled liquor in his glass. "I've played a lot of parts. Soldier, commander, janitor, husband. Sometimes I forget which one is actually me. Maybe they're all you. Different facets of the same person." He looked at her with sudden intensity, as if seeing through the armor she'd worn her entire adult life. "Or maybe we're both so good at pretending that we've lost track of what's real underneath." Victoria felt the observation land with uncomfortable accuracy, but before she could respond, Connor's phone buzzed with an alert. He pulled it from his pocket, read something on the screen, and his entire body went rigid. "What is it?" He turned the phone toward her. The message was brief. "Commander, we're alive. Spectre, Hartley, Hayes, Phoenix Protocol hunted us. Blackwood is U.S. connection. Meet us. Finish this." Below the text was an attached photograph. 3 people in tactical gear, faces partially obscured but recognizable to someone who'd served with them. "Your team survived?" "Some of them. And they've been tracking the same conspiracy that killed your father." Connor stood abruptly, pacing with barely contained energy. "This changes everything. With their testimony and the evidence we're gathering, we can expose the entire network, but we need to move fast. Because if they're reaching out now, it means they've learned something that forced them out of hiding, which means Phoenix Protocol knows they're alive, which means everyone connected to this investigation just became an active target. Victoria's phone rang, cutting through the tension. Emily's name appeared on screen. She answered, keeping her voice steady, despite adrenaline spiking through her system. "Victoria, I'm sorry to call so late, but there's been a security breach at Titan. Someone accessed the classified weapons database remotely. The system flagged it as your credentials, but the IP address doesn't match any location you'd normally use." When? 20 minutes ago. They downloaded files related to testing failures and prototype specifications. Victoria met Connor's eyes across the room. 20 minutes ago, they'd been at dinner with Blackwood, surrounded by witnesses who could verify they were nowhere near a computer. Someone was framing her, setting up a scenario where Victoria appeared to be stealing her own company's secrets. Lock down the system, change all access codes. And Emily, don't tell anyone else about this breach until we've investigated further. You think it's internal? I think someone's trying to make me look like a traitor. And I need time to figure out who before they succeed. She ended the call and turned to Connor. They're accelerating too, framing me, forcing action before we're ready. Then we meet with my team tomorrow, get their intel, combine it with ours, and prepare to burn everything down. What about Lily? Connor's expression hardened with protective determination. She stays with Mrs. O'Brien tomorrow. Somewhere they won't think to look. And if Phoenix Protocol already knows you're alive, then we'd better move faster than they do. Victoria nodded slowly, accepting that their careful investigation had just become a race against exposure and elimination. She'd married Connor Reeves thinking it was a business transaction, but sitting in her penthouse at midnight, discussing treason and murder while his daughter slept peacefully down the hall, Victoria understood the truth. She'd accidentally positioned herself at the center of a conspiracy that had killed her father and would kill her too without hesitation. The only question now was whether she and Connor could destroy it first. The warehouse sat in East Austin's industrial district, surrounded by fabrication shops and freight companies that had closed for the night. Connor parked Victoria's BMW 3 blocks away, insisting they approach on foot through back alleys where security cameras had convenient blind spots. He moved with predator's awareness now, weight balanced on the balls of his feet, hands loose and ready, eyes cataloging every shadow and sightline. This was the warrior who'd survived Yemen's kill zones, no longer bothering to hide behind civilian camouflage. Victoria followed his lead, her heels exchanged for practical boots, her designer coat replaced with dark clothing Connor had pulled from somewhere in his minimal belongings. She'd left the office early under the pretense of migrant headaches, trusting Emily to handle the crisis brewing around the security breach. Lily was safely with Mrs. O'Brien, told only that her father had important business, and Victoria needed to help. The warehouse door opened before Connor could knock. A woman appeared from shadows, 40-something with gray-streaked hair pulled tight and eyes that assessed Victoria in one comprehensive sweep. Sarah Hayes, Victoria guessed from Connor's descriptions. Former Phantom Unit medic, expert in field trauma and close-quarters combat. Commander, been a long time. Connor embraced her briefly, the reunion carrying weight beyond words. Two more figures emerged from the warehouse interior. Wyatt Cross, who went by Spectre, tall and lean with a sniper's economy of movement, and Dominic Hartley, broader and younger, carrying visible scars that suggested he'd survived something catastrophic. The warehouse interior had been converted into a makeshift operations center. Maps covered one wall, photographs connected by red string, laptops displaying surveillance footage and encrypted documents. 5 years of investigation laid bare. Phoenix Protocol's network, financial transfers, dead operatives, stolen weapons systems appearing in conflict zones across 3 continents. Wyatt gestured Victoria toward a folding chair while Connor studied the evidence wall. Your father reached out to our old CO 8 weeks before he died. Said he'd discovered systematic sabotage at Titan Defense, technology being diverted to hostile nations. He couldn't trust official channels because he suspected someone in the Pentagon was compromised. Dominic pulled up files on his laptop. We've been tracking Phoenix Protocol since Yemen. They're not just arms dealers. They're a shadow network embedded in U.S. defense infrastructure. They recruit insiders at contractors like Titan, use them to steal prototypes, then sell to whoever pays. Syria, North Korea, terrorist cells were actively fighting. All using American weapons we supposedly failed in testing. Victoria absorbed this information with growing horror. How deep does this go? Sarah's expression was grim. We've identified at least 15 compromised companies. Titan is their crown jewel. Biggest contracts, most advanced systems, highest security clearances. Nathaniel Blackwood has been running their operation here for over a decade. Connor turned from the evidence wall. You have proof? Wyatt nodded. Financial records showing offshore transfers that coincide exactly with Titan testing failures. Communications between Blackwood and known Phoenix operatives. Testimony from 3 former insiders who agreed to cooperate rather than face treason charges. And this, he pulled up surveillance footage dated 6 weeks prior. The video showed Michael Brennan meeting with an unidentified man in a downtown Austin parking garage. Their conversation was silent, but the body language suggested urgency and fear. Then a second camera angle revealed the man's face. Someone Victoria recognized from Pentagon briefings, a deputy undersecretary for defense procurement. Your father tried going through proper channels. He contacted someone he thought he could trust in the Department of Defense, but that person was Phoenix Protocol 2. They reported back to Blackwood, and 3 days later, your father's yacht exploded. Victoria's hands clenched into fists. She'd mourned her father for 6 weeks while believing his death was a tragic accident, mechanical failure, or pilot error. Learning he'd been murdered, deliberately eliminated for discovering treason, transformed grief into something colder and more focused. How do we expose them? Connor moved to stand beside Victoria, his presence solid and grounding. We need evidence that can't be ignored or buried. Multiple sources, redundant documentation, everything delivered simultaneously to media outlets, FBI, Department of Defense, and congressional oversight committees. Sarah pulled up a timeline on her laptop. We've been building the case for 5 years, but we've been dead officially. Our testimony alone won't carry weight without corroboration from living, legitimate witnesses. Victoria understood immediately. That's why Connor needed to be at Titan, to gather evidence from inside while maintaining cover. Dominic leaned forward. But Blackwood is suspicious now. Your marriage, Connor's background, the security breach yesterday. He's accelerating his own timeline. We estimate you have 72 hours before he moves against you directly. The warehouse door exploded inward with a crash that sent everyone diving for cover. Armed figures poured through the opening. 4, 6, 8 tactical operators in black gear with suppressed weapons already tracking targets. Victoria hit the concrete floor hard, Connor's body covering hers as gunfire erupted in controlled bursts. Phantom unit reacted with practiced precision. Sarah rolled behind equipment crates while drawing a sidearm. Wyatt disappeared up a ladder to elevated position. Dominic flipped a table for cover and returned fire with a rifle that materialized from hidden storage. Connor had Victoria pinned beneath him, one hand protecting her head while his other hand produced a weapon from an ankle holster. "Stay down. Don't move unless I move you." Victoria's training consisted of boardroom negotiations and Pentagon presentations, nothing that prepared her for active combat. She pressed her face against cold concrete while the world dissolved into violence and chaos. Bullets sparked off metal surfaces, shattered laptop screens, punched through walls in sprays of concrete dust. Connor moved with fluid lethality that seemed choreographed but was pure instinct honed through combat. He fired 3 precise shots that dropped one operator, shifted position while dragging Victoria behind thicker cover, fired again to suppress advancing enemies. His face held no expression, all humanity stripped away to reveal the weapon he'd been trained to become. Sarah's voice cut through the gunfire. 6 more entering from the loading bay. We're surrounded. Wyatt eliminated 2 operators from his elevated position, then cursed as return fire forced him to abandon his perch. Dominic's rifle clicked empty, and he transitioned to pistol without pause, his movements mechanical despite wounds bleeding through his tactical vest. Connor assessed their situation in seconds. "We can't hold this position. Back exit through the maintenance tunnel. Move now." He pulled Victoria to her feet and propelled her toward a section of floor where Dominic was already lifting a concealed hatch. Sarah provided covering fire while Wyatt descended first. Then Victoria was being pushed down a ladder into darkness that smelled of mold and stagnant water. The maintenance tunnel dated from decades earlier, part of Austin's forgotten infrastructure that connected buildings in the industrial district. Wyatt led with a flashlight, weapon ready, while Connor brought up the rear with Victoria between them. Behind them, explosions shook the tunnel as their attackers destroyed evidence rather than risk capture. They emerged 6 blocks away through a storm drain, gasping in cool night air that tasted like freedom. Sarah and Dominic appeared minutes later, both bleeding but mobile. The team regrouped in an alley between shuttered businesses, checking weapons and wounds while Connor kept Victoria close. Victoria's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She pressed them against the alley's brick wall, trying to ground herself in something solid while her nervous system caught up with what had just happened. 20 minutes ago, she'd been reviewing evidence in a warehouse. Now she'd survived her first firefight, bullets chewing through concrete inches from her head, Connor's weight crushing air from her lungs while death whistled overhead. She'd faced hostile board members, Pentagon generals, defense contractors who'd built careers on intimidation. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared her for the visceral terror of people actively trying to kill her. The disconnect between knowing violence existed and experiencing it firsthand felt like standing at the edge of a cliff with no railing. Connor's hand found her shoulder, steady despite the chaos they'd escaped. His eyes held understanding. He'd seen this reaction before, in soldiers after their first real combat. "Breathe," he said quietly, his voice cutting through her spiraling thoughts. "You're doing fine. Most civilians would be catatonic right now. You're still moving, still thinking. That's what matters." Victoria forced air into her lungs, counting breaths the way her father had taught her to manage presentation anxiety. Except this wasn't nerves before a speech. This was bone-deep understanding that she'd just become a target in a war where the weapons were real and the consequences permanent. She looked at Connor, at Sarah checking Dominic's wounds with practiced efficiency, at Wyatt scanning their surroundings with casual alertness. These people lived in this world of calculated violence and tactical precision, and she'd just been dragged into it, whether she was ready or not. "I'm okay." Her voice came steadier than she felt, drawing on reserves she hadn't known she possessed. "What's next?" Connor studied her for a moment, something like respect flickering in his eyes, then nodded. "We figure out how they found us." How did they find us? Wyatt's expression was grim. Either they've been tracking us for days, or someone gave them our location. We've been careful for 5 years. This wasn't random. Connor's jaw tightened with terrible understanding. They grabbed my phone from his pocket and powered it down. "Victoria, your phone. Now." She handed over her device without argument. Connor examined it briefly, then dismantled the case to reveal a thin tracking chip embedded beneath the battery. Professional surveillance, military grade, probably installed weeks ago. "Blackwood's been watching you this whole time. Every meeting, every conversation. He knows we met with Phantom Unit, knows we're gathering evidence, knows exactly how close we are to exposing him." Sarah bandaged Dominic's shoulder with practiced efficiency. "Then, he'll move against you soon. Tonight, maybe tomorrow. You need to get Victoria somewhere safe while we regroup." Connor shook his head. "Safe doesn't exist anymore. Phoenix Protocol has resources we can't match. Money, personnel, political connections. Running just delays the inevitable." Victoria found her voice, despite fear still coursing through her system. "Then we don't run. We attack first, expose everything before they can eliminate us." Wyatt studied her with new respect. "You're talking about going public with incomplete evidence. That's risky. If we can't prove everything, they'll discredit us as conspiracy theorists or disgruntled employees. Better than being dead." Victoria's voice carried steel forged through 6 weeks of grief and tonight's violence. "My father tried to be careful, and they killed him. I won't make the same mistake." Connor pulled her aside while Phantom Unit discussed tactical options. His expression held concern, mixed with something that looked like pride. "This isn't your world. Combat, surveillance, people trying to kill you. You don't have to be part of this." Victoria met his gaze directly. "They murdered my father. They're stealing from my company, betraying my country, and now they're trying to kill me. This is exactly my world, whether I chose it or not." For a moment, something shifted between them, the contract marriage dissolving to reveal genuine partnership forged through shared danger. Connor's hand found hers, his grip warm despite cold night air. "Okay, then we finish this together." They split up, Phantom Unit heading to a secondary safe house, while Connor and Victoria returned to her penthouse through circuitous routes designed to shake any remaining surveillance. The apartment felt too exposed now, floor-to-ceiling windows that offered spectacular views, but also made them visible targets. Connor moved through each room, checking for intrusions, while Victoria accessed her home computer and began compiling evidence. Michael Brennan had been more prepared than anyone realized. His personal files contained encrypted backups of everything: testing data, financial irregularities, communication logs, even video recordings of conversations with board members where Blackwood revealed more than he intended. Her father had been building a case, gathering ammunition for a war he knew was coming. Victoria downloaded everything to secure drives while Connor established defensive positions throughout the apartment. He moved furniture to create cover, identified sight lines and potential entry points, transformed her home into a tactical position with grim efficiency. When he finished, he found Victoria at her laptop with tears streaming silently down her face. "He read over my bedtime stories when I was little. taught me to ride a bike, showed me how to read corporate balance sheets before I was 10. He was distant, focused on work, sometimes absent for weeks chasing contracts. But he loved me, and he died trying to protect me. Connor knelt beside her chair. He succeeded. You're still here because of decisions he made, precautions he took. The marriage clause wasn't control. It was putting a weapon between you and the people who wanted you dead. Victoria turned to face him fully. You're not a weapon. You're a person who was broken and rebuilt yourself. A father raising his daughter alone. A man who remembered one act of kindness for 15 years. What's that? I realized something. I'd spent 5 years hunting ghosts for revenge, surviving on anger and nothing else. Then I met you again, and Lily asked if you'd be her mom, and it hit me. Family isn't what you avenge. It's what you come home to. It's the reason you stop hunting and start living. Victoria kissed him then. Not the perfunctory touch during their courthouse wedding, but real connection born from honesty and shared danger. Connor responded with careful intensity, his hands framing her face as if she were something precious rather than a contractual obligation. When they separated, Victoria's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Emily's name appeared on screen, but when Victoria answered, a different voice responded, male, cultured, familiar. Victoria, my dear, we need to talk about your extracurricular activities. Nathaniel Blackwood's tone carried grandfatherly concern that made Victoria's blood run cold. She put the phone on speaker so Connor could hear, watching his expression harden as the older man continued. I've been quite patient, you understand. Your father's investigation was unfortunate, but manageable. Your marriage to a mysteriously qualified janitor raised questions, but no immediate concerns. However, your meeting tonight with certain individuals who should be dead, that requires more direct action. What do you want? Blackwood's laugh held genuine amusement. Want? My dear, I have everything I want. Titan's technology has made me extraordinarily wealthy. Phoenix Protocol has operated successfully for over a decade. Your father's death was regrettable, but necessary. And now you've forced my hand by involving yourself in matters you don't understand. Try me. Very well. I've taken out an insurance policy, so to speak. Young Lily is such a delightful child. 8 years old, loves soccer and science projects, trusts adults who seem friendly. She's currently in my protective custody, and her continued safety depends entirely on your cooperation. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth while Connor went absolutely still, every muscle tensed with lethal potential. The voice that emerged from his throat carried death itself. If you've touched my daughter, she's perfectly safe, Commander Reeves. Or should I call you by your actual name? Former Phantom Unit Leader, presumed killed in Yemen, now playing janitor at my company. I've known who you were since you applied for the maintenance position. Did you really think I wouldn't recognize someone Michael Brennan specifically requested? Connor's expression revealed nothing, but Victoria saw his hands shake with barely contained rage. Where is she? At Titan headquarters, 8th floor, my private office. She's quite comfortable, though understandably confused about why her father's employer wanted to speak with her. Come collect her at midnight. Both of you, unarmed, or I'll demonstrate exactly how ruthless Phoenix Protocol can be when protecting its interests. The call ended. Connor was already moving, grabbing weapons and checking magazines with mechanical precision. Victoria caught his arm, forcing him to meet her eyes. It's a trap. He's going to kill us all. I know. But I'm not leaving my daughter with that monster. Victoria made a decision that felt both terrifying and completely necessary. Then we bring Phantom Unit. We gather every piece of evidence we have. We broadcast it to every media outlet simultaneously. And we turn his trap into ours. Better destroyed than stolen. Victoria's voice carried absolute conviction. My father built Titan to save lives. If it's been twisted into something that takes them instead, then I'd rather see it burn than let it stand as a monument to his betrayal. Some legacies are worth protecting. Others need to be torn down so something better can rise. For the next 2 hours, they prepared for midnight with tactical precision. Victoria uploaded evidence to every major news organization, law enforcement agency, and congressional oversight committee she could identify, all scheduled to send simultaneously at 12:15 a.m. Phantom Unit received coordinates and infiltration routes to Titan's 8th floor. Connor briefed everyone on building layout, security protocols, and potential defensive positions Blackwood might establish. At 11:30, Victoria and Connor left the penthouse for what might be their final journey together. The drive to Titan took 20 minutes through empty downtown streets. Austin's skyline glittered with artificial beauty that seemed grotesque against the violence awaiting them. Connor parked in the executive garage where this had all begun, where Victoria had first noticed the janitor with military bearing, where they'd negotiated their contract marriage, where everything had started. He turned to face her, his expression carrying all the words they hadn't spoken. If this goes wrong, it won't. If it does, I need you to know that marrying you wasn't just mission parameters. Somewhere between contract and crisis, you became real to me, you and Lily both. Victoria's throat tightened with emotion she didn't try to hide anymore. You remembered me. For 15 years. From 30 seconds outside a building. Connor's hand cupped her face with careful reverence, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. You gave me more than a sandwich that day. You gave me proof that humanity still existed when I'd forgotten what that looked like. That one small act, it kept me alive through the worst missions, the darkest moments when quitting seemed easier than surviving. When I wanted to give up, I'd remember, someone cared enough to share her lunch with a stranger. Maybe the world was worth protecting after all. And now I'm not protecting the world anymore. I'm protecting my world. His forehead rested against hers, their breathing synchronized in the quiet car. You, Lily, this family we built by accident and fought like hell to keep. Turns out that homeless kid you fed 15 years ago grew up and married you. Life has a strange sense of poetry. Victoria kissed him then, pouring 5 weeks of accumulated fear and hope and unexpected love into physical connection. Everything they'd survived, everything they still had to lose, everything worth fighting for condensed into this single moment. When they separated, she kept her hand firmly in his. Then let's make sure we all survive to figure out what forever looks like. They entered Titan's lobby at 11:55 p.m., passing through security checkpoints that Connor's credentials opened without difficulty. The building felt wrong at night, familiar spaces transformed into something threatening by empty corridors and emergency lighting. Their footsteps echoed against marble as they rode the elevator to the 8th floor where Victoria had spent 5 years building a career that was about to end. Nathaniel Blackwood waited in Victoria's own office, seated behind her desk with Lily in a chair beside him. The girl's face lit up when she saw her father, but Blackwood's hand on her shoulder kept her seated. 8-year-old eyes held confusion and fear, but also trust that her father would fix this, right on time. I appreciate punctuality. Connor's voice emerged flat and dangerous. Let her go. Whatever happens next, she's not part of this. Blackwood's face arranged itself into practiced concern, the kind of expression that had fooled board members for decades, but now made Victoria's skin crawl. But she is part of this, Connor. Children are the perfect leverage against men like you. Warriors who've lost everything except their offspring. You'll do anything to ensure her safety, including sacrificing yourself. Victoria stepped forward, her voice steady despite fury coursing through her veins. You killed my father because he discovered your treason. You've stolen from Titan for over a decade, selling American weapons to our enemies. That ends tonight. Blackwood's expression shifted, grandfatherly facade dissolving to reveal something far colder beneath. Your father was weak, Victoria. Brilliant, yes. Visionary, certainly. But weak where it actually mattered. His voice carried decades of accumulated resentment. I stood beside Michael for 30 years. I helped him build Titan from nothing. My Pentagon connections, my political capital, my strategic vision. And what did I receive? A seat at his table while he took every bow, every award, every moment of glory. Second place for 3 decades. So you betrayed him for recognition? Victoria's voice dripped contempt. That's pathetic. I betrayed him because he was a hypocrite. Blackwood's composure cracked, revealing raw bitterness like a wound that had never healed. Michael preached about protecting American lives while making billions from weapons designed to kill efficiently. He wanted moral purity and massive profits. You can't have both, Victoria. I simply stopped pretending the contradiction didn't exist. Phoenix Protocol is honest about what we are. Merchants of death who profit from conflict, regardless of which side purchases our products. Your father wanted to be a merchant who played saint. He was trying to do the right thing. The right thing? Blackwood laughed, harsh and bitter. There is no right thing in our industry. We build weapons designed to kill human beings as efficiently as possible, then sell them to governments who use them to kill other human beings. Dressing it up in patriotism and defense contracts doesn't change the fundamental reality. I just stopped lying to myself about it. Your father never could. The clock on Victoria's desk read 12:14 a.m. Somewhere across the city, emails were launching to hundreds of recipients, journalists, investigators, politicians, evidence that couldn't be contained or erased flooding into public consciousness. Phoenix Protocol's empire beginning its collapse. Blackwood noticed Victoria checking the time and frowned. What did you do? Victoria's lips curved with cold satisfaction, her father's ruthless determination reflected in every word. I burned it all down. I burned it all down. Every contract, every financial transfer, every communication. It's going public right now. By tomorrow morning, Phoenix Protocol will be front-page news, and you'll be facing treason charges. Blackwood's composure cracked slightly. He reached for something beneath the desk, but Connor moved first, crossing the space with inhuman speed and disarming the older man before he could draw a weapon. Lily scrambled away from her captor, running to Victoria, who pulled her close and turned to shield her from whatever violence was coming. The office windows exploded inward as Phantom Unit made entry on rappel lines, weapons trained on Blackwood. Sarah secured Lily, while Wyatt and Dominic cleared the room. Connor stood over Blackwood with his gun steady, finger on the trigger, everything in his body language screaming revenge for his murdered teammates and 5 years of enforced death. Connor, don't. Victoria's voice cut through the rage. He deserves justice, not execution. For a long moment, Connor didn't move, wrestling with demons Victoria couldn't fully understand. Then slowly, deliberately, he lowered his weapon and stepped back. Wyatt zip-tied Blackwood's hands while reading him rights that probably wouldn't matter, given the evidence against him. Federal agents swarmed Titan headquarters 20 minutes later, having received Victoria's evidence dump and moved with impressive speed. They found Phoenix Protocol's complete network mapped in Blackwood's private files. Names, transactions, stolen prototypes, 15 years of treason documented with damning precision. Dawn broke over Austin with Victoria, Connor, and Lily sitting together in a federal agent's office giving statements. The girl had fallen asleep against her father's shoulder, exhausted by violence and terror she was too young to fully process. Connor held her with one arm while his free hand remained linked with Victoria's. "It's over." Victoria said it quietly, testing whether the words felt true. Connor met her gaze. "This part's over, but we still have questions about what happens next. To us, to Titan, to this family we accidentally built." Victoria looked at Lily sleeping peacefully despite everything, at Connor who'd protected them both at tremendous personal cost, at the wreckage of her father's company that would take years to rebuild. Somewhere in the chaos of recent weeks, the contract marriage had transformed into something real, messy and complicated but worth fighting for. "I think we figure it out together. No more contracts, no more pretending. Just three people who survived something terrible and decided family was worth the effort." Something softened in Connor's face then, real joy breaking through tactical reserve, the kind of warmth he'd forgotten he was capable of feeling. "Yeah, I can work with that." 6 months later, Titan Defense Systems had been rebuilt from the ground up under Victoria's leadership with new ethics protocols and independent oversight. Lily's mother had reached out once after seeing news coverage of Connor's heroism, asking to reconnect. He'd politely declined, explaining that Lily already had the family she needed, one built on presence, not biology. Some doors, once closed, were better left that way. They'd moved from Victoria's penthouse to a house in the suburbs with a yard where Lily played soccer with neighborhood kids. The home held warmth the sterile apartment had lacked, photos on walls, Lily's drawings pinned to the refrigerator, Sunday dinners with phantom unit that felt like found family. They'd paid a terrible price for this piece. Her father's life, Connor's 5 years in shadow, Lily's innocence sacrificed to gunfire and kidnapping. But sitting in evening sunlight with Connor's arm around her shoulders and Lily chattering about her school day, Victoria understood with absolute clarity that it had been worth every sacrifice, every scar, every moment of terror. Some partnerships were signed in contracts, cold, transactional, designed to dissolve after predetermined time periods. The best ones were forged in fire, tempered by impossible choices, and emerged unbreakable, not despite what they'd survived, but because of it. This was the family her father had tried to give her with his final act of love. The one Connor had almost died protecting. The one Lily held together with 8-year-old wisdom and unconditional trust. And Victoria would defend it as fiercely as her father had defended his vision for Titan, as Connor defended his team through 5 years of hunting ghosts, as Lily defended the simple truth that families chose each other. Some battles were worth fighting. Some victories were worth any cost. This one, this family, was worth everything.